Thank you for joining us today at the monthly Community Advisory Board meeting. Uh, this event is live streamed on YouTube and is being recorded. And we will get started. We're looking right today. We're going to focus on the toolkit and finishing that up, a couple of other things on the agenda, and then we'll get rolling. So without any more from me, let me turn it over to South Face.
Great, thanks, Mike. So we can go on down to the next slide. And so first off, we'll do our attendance, and then we're going to spend, ideally, the bulk of the meeting going through the tiered pathways, although if it doesn't take us 90 minutes, we certainly don't need to use all 90 minutes. And with the objective of confirming that the modifications we've made to the rankings are in line with your recollections of the discussions we've had with you over the past month and a half to refine this tier placement. And then we'll transition over into a discussion of chapters 1 through 3 that have been shared with y'all and collect any feedback or discussion items you have to date on this material. So with that, let's go on to the next slide and do some quick attendance. Mike, did I catch you saying we should just call on the people in the chat, or that we see are in attendance and just confirm their organization rather than go through the full org list?
I think so, because we got a lot of folks out for holidays, some international.
All right. So area code 706.
There's Charlie with the Housing Authority.
Hey, Charlie. Then it looks like we have Joma represented.
That's John.
Hey, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with my button, but yep, John Newland here.
All right, John Newland. Hi, John. And then I see Michael Foster for 100% Athens.
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Michael. On the South Bay side, you have myself, Megan O'Neill, as well as my colleagues, Aaron Gallagher and Maria Weber. On the Greenlink Analytics side, we have Matt Cox and Samantha McDonald. And then on the ACC Gov side, I'm seeing Mike Wharton, Ilka McConnell, and Maggie Songster. Is there anyone present that I haven't yet identified? All right, that was much faster. Good call, Mike. Then let's progress through to the slide with the pyramid on it, Maria. And this is a refresh of how we've defined the tier items, with tier 1 representing most urgent for success. And this is through assessing that they meet either or both of the criteria of low-hanging fruit / very feasible in immediate or short term, or highest climate and or community impact to Athens-Clarke County with less emphasis on feasibility. Tier 2 refers to as opportunities present themselves. And tier 3 reflects items that pose significant challenges and or may not be feasible at this time and therefore warrant being de-emphasized, but not necessarily because they might make sense in the long term as we move forward. So that will flip through as quickly as we can. Halt us if you want to stop and discuss any of these items. So we have kept tier underneath energy, benchmarking, and beyond. We've identified this as tier 1. Any objections? All right, and on the next slide is focused on Green Bank, where we've divided up different components of this Green Bank item into tier 1, 2, and 3. Any comments or objections on this one? All right, so we can go to the next slide, which is municipal buildings action. And we've broken these 3 out. We did a little reconfiguration after our first meeting to reorder these a bit. moving a few from the tier 3 up to tier 2 particularly. Any comments or objections here? Okay, next slide. Green building incentives for new construction. This is
I'm sorry, Megan. Can we go back to that slide for just 1 second? The previous slide.
sure.
Oh. I think there. I mean, I remember Andrew offering a suggestion of taking one of the SPLOST projects that we have coming up and doing a net zero demonstration project, which seems like it would fall into this category unless it's come somewhere else. But I think that I had also, in a written form, submitted that as a possible additional action item, and I don't know if that's somewhere else or it should be added here, or if there was
It may
discussion about
be
that.
somewhere else, but I can go ahead and edit in real time here to make sure that it is captured. That was rated as a tier 1, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember having much discussion about it other than I know that Andrew it was one of the items that he had submitted when he had submitted several of his items, and then I had reiterated it from 100% when I sent some in. So
I think it was a tier 1 in the brief discussions we had.
Okay. All right, thanks for catching that. All right, so now we can go on to the next slide, which is green building incentives for new construction. Also rated as a tier 1. Okay, then next slide, our buildings energy stretch code for new construction. So unlike the last one, which was incentive focused, this is talking about some mandates to get buildings to be more efficient. We also rated this as a tier 1.
This one does make me a bit nervous because with new projects coming in, there are things that Athens-Clarke County already requires that add some additional costs. Of course, we're trying to create the community that we want to live in, and I understand that. I just am also thinking about projects that, you know, we sometimes have a hard time landing anyway, and adding another cost on the front end of a project.
Yeah, understood. Do you think that could be addressed somewhat from an implementation standpoint, where if Athens were to pass a policy like this in the years to come, if they provided sufficient phase-in or notice to builders so that they could plan around that well ahead of time?
I think for industrial projects, they're coming in from the outside and they have a choice. They can choose Athens or choose somewhere that's less expensive. And so I think from an industrial perspective, what it will do is just have people choose a different community.
Is there some
Matt?
additional language? I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody.
I was about to ask Matt if he had any comments on that based on what he's seen elsewhere.
I mean, that is a consideration for most industrial use cases. is, a piece of it is building costs and energy costs. I think the evidence on how much energy cost plays into it's normally shown to be pretty minor, but building costs would be a consideration. If we were looking, I think part of it's just going to be like, how much does this align with the actual geography? How much is there right now, and how much we're trying to attract? So those are, it's relatively small as a portion of the overall footprint that we've been evaluating so far. So if we thought that there was it strikes me as a trade-off at that point. If we were
Yeah.
looking at how we were going to get our residential and commercial buildings, this is also sectoral. So that's another distinction you could make, is that the industrials could be facing something that's not quite the same as what the majority of your residential and commercial stock would be. But I also wouldn't want you to necessarily put yourself in a spot where you were trying to sacrifice the environment in order to attract more industrial investment.
Right. And if it was just energy, then that would be one thing. But I think, and I'm not saying I don't agree with what our county does, because I do. I live here. I've lived here a long time and I love Athens, but we do have higher stormwater costs than any of the surrounding communities. We also require more trees for, as part of when a building is built, and then, energy on top of that. And I think that is one of the most common pieces of feedback that we hear from developers in our community, are these additional costs. So I do want to mention that, because I do think that it is a trade-off. And when industrial clients are trying to do site selection, it's basically a process of elimination. They're trying to find reasons to eliminate you. So, I guess I would just say we need to think about it.
One thing with this particular policy option, though, is that these are voluntary. Like stretch codes are not anything that's mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
These are,
but it says
requires
requires new buildings to be more energy efficient. Is requires the word that maybe is not accurate there?
Not for a stretch code. So a stretch code is normally, there's an incentive tied to achievement of higher performance.
Okay, so the
so,
wording that
we
says
may need to
adopt a
modify
buildings
it.
code that requires new buildings to be more energy efficient than current state codes is maybe encourages new buildings.
What if we put in there at the end of it something to the effect of, so at the end of the period, or you make that a semicolon and say to consider including incentives?
I guess I'm a little confused. My understanding of stretch codes is that they are exactly as they're described here, that we have a state minimum building code and we're going to push our local code beyond that, and it would be a requirement. And I think that the discussion about the differences by building sector is an important one. I don't have any experience with industrial buildings or industrial clients or what drives their decision making. And it seems like in most industrial sites, process energy would be way, way higher than building energy in terms of usage, but I don't know that. And so building energy probably is a minimal expense in terms of what's going on there. But in residential and like multifamily residential, single family, multifamily, absolutely and for sure, Georgia's codes are subpar, and there is a point at which we do better on energy codes and we are saving residents money on their energy bills. And so I would like to frame that, at least in the residential sector, as choosing to benefit people who are building versus residents. I think it is exactly a trade-off in many cases. And so I feel pretty strongly that it should be, that our local code should be stronger than the state code is currently. And like I said, I don't have any experience in industrial, and so I'm not really going to speak to that. But
Let me toss out one thing. When you look at what these codes will do from an energy use standpoint, is that not going to result in cost savings? So it's a question then of when the ROI that break even point, you arrive at that, which may fall within the industry standards where they're looking for 3 years or less, or it may fall within more of a 5 to 10 year range, which would be less of an interest. But at the end of the day, isn't it all going to save them money? And uh, is that something that those industries consider when they look at those building codes, or is that something that we promote more of how we're saving you that it's going to result in operating money saving?
I think
Well,
it probably depends on the industry and how they're driven, like how their decision-making process is driven. A lot of them are global industries, and of course, they're very interested in sustainability, and it's a key piece of how they plan new facilities. But for the ones that, maybe are not that large, then their perspective on ROI versus upfront cost might be different.
Yeah, and from
in the
my
residential
perspective,
sector. Oh, go ahead, Charlie.
I'm sorry. I deal lately with a lot of guys coming in from out of town, architects, engineers, and contractors, and sometimes our little code differences can really blindside them when they're doing a design, and then you get all the way to plan review and find out all these, little code changes you didn't realize were there. I love the concept. It's just without incentive, that's the other side. I think if you have incentives, it makes it easier to do. I understand when you have an owner operator coming in, yes, they're going to say, oh, well, yeah, I'd love to do this. It'll save me money in the long run. The problem is a lot of your developers are going to end up renting or selling the property, and they don't have any incentive to do it.
Well, I guess the good news is that this is the big picture. So if we included language that said consider incentives as part of the process, we still have to actually do it. So those changes we'd have to go through the steps in the process to change it. And I would assume that there'd be a lot of discussion as we move forward from industry, business, residential. I think we would see a lot of discussion that would also shape what that final building code looks like. So maybe that helps a little bit.
I don't know what that means in practice, though, Mike. I understood what you said. I'm just not sure what that really means. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. At least you understood what I said. Sometimes people said, I don't even connect with what you just said. I guess what I'm seeing is the process would bring people. We would want to make sure that when we bring this forward, that we have the participation of people in the community that would help also shape that. So that's why I guess I have less heartburn, but I'm certainly open. I just feel through the process there will be some things like if industry says, that's gonna stymie us completely, then I don't know that we would necessarily push that. If it says this sounds like a good balance, then we might, because we also, as you recall, Ilka, we had some of the industries were saying, why aren't we doing more?
Yeah. That's what I was
So
saying, is it really depends on the industry, because some of our
yeah,
industries also said, to be honest, we hadn't really thought about this that much before, but it really
yes, right.
depends. The really big ones, of course, they've been doing this stuff for 15 or 20 years. And so they're already well into their process, but it just really depends on the company and what size it is.
I guess I'd add one more thing in that one of the biggest challenges we're going to face on buildings is not new buildings, but existing buildings. Like going back and bringing up the energy efficiency of existing buildings is one of the bigger challenges we face. And so for every year that we delay making new buildings more efficient, we add to the greater problem that we have in bringing up older buildings to be more efficient. And so for that reason, it seems like a no-brainer to pursue this. You know, a lot of communities ahead of us have done this. They often start with a process where there are incentives to get to the higher level. Those things are in place for a few years, at which point they become permanent. Ithaca, New York had one where they spent a lot of time trying to figure out how you get buildings more efficient without adding additional cost to them, and so created a pathway separate from you know, their code requirement pathway that focused on things like the amount of windows in a building or the shape of a building, since surface area to volume makes a big difference in how much energy you're losing through walls. And so I think that there are ways to do this, and we can focus on the things that are important. But I don't see how we can say that we are trying to tackle, you know, one of the largest energy users in the community and not focus on energy use in buildings with the most effective tool the community has, which is building code.
And in a way, for existing buildings, that will be when those companies are getting ready to expand. That'll be, you know, just thinking about how would you really do it through building code. It would really be if they're doing renovations or expansions.
And then it occurs to me too that the energy ecosystem, as certain opportunities and pathways, costs go down, energy costs continue to go up. I wonder how much people are going to jump in there anyway. So all that kind of plays around. So is the feeling that we hold steady on this? Is there some language to modify it, or do we need to have, I guess, what we haven't done it yet? Do we need to have a vote? So what do y'all think?
As a non-cab member, I kind of want to put a suggestion forth of sorts, which might be almost splitting this, of maintaining this slide with the modification of essentially strict, like, we can figure out how to wordsmith it, but saying like adopt more stringent mandatory building code, but then have another slide that adopts building energy stretch codes, and those could be seen as discrete policy pathways, with the stretch code identifying different avenues or steps to start moving people in the right direction, but also having that mandate on the table. I think to some degree those might be two separate conversations and two distinct items for contemplation. What do you think of that concept?
I'm not sure that that clarifies the issue. I mean, I think in the end, that this is, you know, if this slide were left intact, this were a tier 1 item, there is obviously going to be a pretty rigorous process to move something like this forward. We saw that however long ago it was when Athens was looking to adopt a green building code that floundered and died and sat on the shelf for 10 years. So I think there'll be lots of conversation and lots of community involvement and lots of process that does that. But I think that this notion is a sound one, and some other deciding body will take the political role of moving it forward in whatever form the community deems to be appropriate. So, but I mean, I think that this is a sound slide and is very clear as to what it's saying and makes sense. So.
So my question is really just nomenclature. Why are they calling it a stretch code and just instead of just a more, I guess, a tighter existing code?
I think that was a bit of a wording snafu on our part, to be totally fair, or upfront. I think this should have been phrased differently as something like adopt green building code or otherwise, because there is a commonly accepted concept of the term stretch meaning some element of voluntary going above and beyond or stretching. So we might want to reword this regardless to make it understood that we're talking about a more stringent code requirement, and maybe, and most likely during that very thorough policy design process, you could tap into these concepts of voluntary, above and beyond kinds of things and incentives tied to those. But in principle, I would advise thinking of this slide as a adopt more stringent building code concept.
So maybe take the word stretch out. And I mean,
Okay.
I assumed that the idea was, since the 2013, from 2010 to 13, it dropped only 4%, that we were looking at trying to do a catch up of that line, that kind of progression downward and try to get to 42. So that's where I thought the stretch came in, is to push a little bit more than what has been done in the past. And if the word stretch derails the conversation, take it out. It's just not that important a word.
I mean, it's not that I oppose it generally. I think it just, it makes it more confusing. To me, stretch sounds like, let's stretch voluntarily, but if it's a requirement, then it's a requirement.
And I'm agreeing with you, Ilka. If it kind of makes people stop and gets confused instead of focusing on it. So I was actually appreciating the fact you caught that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm updating our notes. We'll rework this. All right, the next slide. Oh, now we've got NBI stretch code measures. There you go, thanks. So next up was an EV readiness in new construction policy, which was rated as a tier 1. And for these, if you're okay with it, I'll just, after I introduce the concept, I'll just stop talking and count to 5 in my brain. And if no one says anything, we'll just move to the next slide. All right, next slide. And I'm interpreting the silence as approval. All right, the next 0 energy code.
I'm sorry, on the previous one, I was just thinking, is that only for new construction? Because I know one of the things that we want to look at is, since part of what we're looking at is for Athens-Clarke County properties, we also want to promote EV readiness that's available to the general public. Well, for Athens-Clarke County properties, fleet, as well as the general public, from our standpoint, that's certainly one of the things our office is going to be looking at.
So for this particular item, this was referring specifically to new construction. There is, and through building codes, there is a slide later on here specifically about EV expansion. I think that might be, when we get to that slide, that might be one to tap that item into.
Thank you. There's so many I start forgetting where they are. So my apologies.
I think it's like 20 slides from now, but we'll get there.
All right. I'll look forward to then.
All right. The next one was a net zero energy code, which we rated as a tier 3. Oh, and here we did indicate the net zero concept for demonstration project, but it's good to also explicitly reference that in the earlier municipal slide. All right, next slide. This one referred to state level action, which was rated as a tier 1 and refers to getting engaged in state processes like legislative sessions and integrated resource plans and beyond. Okay, next slide is voluntary energy efficiency and conservation program, which we rated as a tier 2. Okay, next slide is utility incentives, which would refer to promoting awareness and expansion of utility-sponsored programs to incentivize customer investment in clean energy. We rated this as a tier 3.
Is there a reference somewhere to, I know we've talked a lot about education and getting information out to people, but is there some reference about highlighting or promoting current programs that exist? I mean, it seems like they're underutilized generally, and just getting people to understand that they're out there. So not creating something, but just letting people know it already exists seems like that might be a higher priority than this. And does that exist? Have we already seen that?
That is coming up in a future slide.
I agree.
Yeah.
I feel like this should be like maybe a tier 1 or a tier 2, because as long as we're getting out and sharing information, this is something that already exists and already has resources that are allocated to it by folks other than us. If it's helping spread the word and helping to connect people, I feel like it should be, like Michael said, a higher or lower, I guess a lower tier.
Absolutely. I agree.
And also, sorry, going back to the
Rated.
previous one on the voluntary program for voluntary, that's going to be kind of along the same stream, right? As if there's already a program for it and it's more about connecting people to resources and sharing information about this program, then maybe it kind of goes along with some of those other sort of educational and connecting people to existing things.
That makes sense. All right. So you'll be happy to know that when we do get to that later slide, we do cite education around existing programs as a tier 1 item.
So maybe on the slide about this slide right here about the utility incentives, maybe we should clarify that this is because it seems like you said something about this is like creating new programs, or I guess I'm confused about the difference between this and existing programs.
Yeah, so this, and others chime in by all means. This is pulled from that very large spreadsheet, and this refers conceptually, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, also to just general utility programs that the county might help work with utilities to shape and providing, and doesn't necessarily refer exclusively to existing programs. That'd be an accurate statement, Matt.
Yeah, this is more about new program creation.
All right.
Do you think we can clarify that on the slide?
Yeah. All right. Got that. And on the next slide, we've got water conservation items booked together as tier 2. All right. Next slide is Clean Energy Task Force, which was rated as tier 1. All right. The next slide is First Responder Education, which is rated as tier 2. Next slide is develop microgrids for critical infrastructure with we split this out based on feedback to have a tier 1 that's advocating for microgrid policy change and a tier 3 item of partnering with the utility to develop microgrid projects. Next slide is develop and deploy smart grids and meters, identified as tier 2. And the next slide refers to special purpose local option sales taxes, which is also rated a tier 2. Right. The next slide is explore opportunities for ground source heat pumps, rated at tier 3. The next slide is explore opportunities for non-traditional solar, rated as tier 2. The following slide, also a tier 2, is explore opportunities for renewable natural gas in buildings. Next slide is the one I was referring to a minute or two ago, community engagement, transparency, and education, with a tier 1 focusing on clean energy and equity planning, incentives, education around existing programs, community engagement and communication, updating and publishing greenhouse gas inventories and educational programs available to the building community. And then as a tier 2, energy efficiency demonstration programs. Right, the next slide is water efficiency, with segmented out tier 2 items of a water efficient business certification, education around the water energy nexus, and a rounded up efficiency program, and rated as tier 3, water efficiency bulk purchasing program and net zero water code. Okay. Next up is workforce training collaboration, which was rated as a tier 1. Next slide is more municipal buildings, rating as a tier 1, the study of addressing water loss and high loss meters, improving wastewater efficiency, and expanding wastewater CHP at water treatment plants. All rated as tier 1. All right, then the next slide is currently unavailable solar options, which we rated as a tier 3, and those include items like community solar and community choice aggregation. Then on the next slide, we have purchasing decisions with some items that we broke out into 3 separate tiers, with tier 1 being identifying local renewable energy credit procurement and divestment of ACC pension fund from fossil fuels. Tier 2 is carbon offsets and non-local, but still Georgia RECs. And tier 3 was non-local national REC procurement. Okay. Next up was reduce urban heat island effect. And so we had a tier 1 for targeted heat island efforts for low-income and underserved communities. And tier 2, pursuing efforts to increase reflectivity of impervious surfaces and tree coverage and to address social stresses induced by urban heat island issues. Okay, next slide is public transportation with 3 separate tiers of items.
Sorry, can we go back one slide really quick? Okay, thanks.
Sure thing. All right. Did you have any comments on that slide, Ilka, or just want to catch up?
No, I just didn't read as fast as when you flipped it through, and I was just thinking. So the idea of both of these is that efforts will figure out what those efforts are later?
Yeah, and work with
Okay,
parallel efforts that are already underway.
gotcha. Okay.
Yes, thanks. All right. Public transportation.
Okay, I have a, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the next slide because it occurred to me that we said we targeted the low income, but aren't we also wanting it to include ways of making sure that that's integrated into our efforts as we move forward? And I guess that is the feeling that for everyone, I should finish that sentence, that it's integrated into what we're doing for everyone. Is the feeling that that goes into tier 2 as those opportunities pop up, then we'll jump on them. Just thinking around government buildings, for example, there are some government buildings that are fairly old that don't necessarily have the best heat island mitigation installed. So are there some things we can look at for mitigating those areas? And that would be, is this feeling that's a tier 2 and we jump on that when we have the chance as opposed to making it part of tier 1? In other words, are we pushing the priority down for trying to work on heat island effect for existing ACC stock if we don't put it in tier 1? Or
Could we maybe
is that,
add that concept to the municipal buildings actions we have in an earlier slide and rank it as a tier 1 there?
I'd be okay with that. Look at ways of creating better enhancing green infrastructure in existing buildings, ACC buildings, because I know we can do that.
All right, I've added that to what is slide 11. So when we send these out after the meeting, you'll be able to see the changes made in red text across the slides.
Sorry, my brain wasn't working faster.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. All right. Maria, can we go ahead and progress to the next slide? Yes, public transportation. Then next slide. All right, landfill gas rated as a tier 2. All right, next slide. All right. This one is traffic flow management for emissions reductions.
Can you share what y'all are thinking congestion pricing will mean in the Athens area?
Well, first, that's why we put it as a tier 3.
Uh-huh.
Essentially, and Megan jump in there, but it's where as the traffic increases, the cost of access goes up. It would be more applicable to places that have cost to travel down travel lanes, like Peach Pass. Is that accurate? Or does the actual parking go up as congestion goes up? So the cost of parking goes up.
That looks like
Yeah.
he's about to say something, which is why
Yeah.
I've been
Speak up, Matt.
Sorry. Yeah, this is generally related to either putting some form of pricing in place in an area where there isn't one currently, and then also we had talked about some of the kind of, I don't know, for transportation nerds, the exciting innovations in the smart space here where you can start to have that pricing be dynamically adjusted based on current traffic levels and congestion levels in specific commercial districts.
So if
So
you
go
drive into
through the
that, so
apps.
I'm thinking about the Peach Pass on the highway. So what does that mean for Athens though? If you drive within a certain zone, you have to pay a fee?
That would be for congestion pricing.
Yeah, that's what that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
So you would hit
That's
certain
congestion.
zones of Athens. And so the idea would be to spread out when people are commuting. Is it supposed to reduce the amount of idling pollution in a certain period of time to sort of spread it out throughout the day?
Ideally, this is, the preference of most economists. This implementation creates a financial incentive to spread the traffic, to not drive downtown at the same time everyone else is. And
Mm-hmm.
if the price is set, what they would say efficiently, then you would be also incorporating things like the cost of pollution into the price that's paid, so that people were getting an incentive and they were paying for the damage that they caused by entering a part of the city at the correct or at a specific time.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them that are in practice are not that sophisticated,
Uh-huh.
and so they're just kind of in the real world, they're being assessed as more of like a fixed fee. So during certain hours of the day, if you try to drive into London, you're going to have to pay £10 if you try to do that during rush hour. Or if you drive into New York City, they're they're setting one of these up now. So they're still kind of coming up with what the pricing mechanism itself will be in which areas are targeted by the congestion zone. So they don't quite have like the full dynamic flexibility that the ideal economics solution would yield. But that's the genesis of the idea, is trying to make it so that people pay more for resources when they're scarce, and that they're paying for the damage that their actions are causing.
Isn't it also encouraging people, because of the economics would go to a point where it becomes more economical to ride a metro train or a bus than it would be to drive a car?
Yes, that would be one of the spillover effects, is that now alternative transit modes become more appealing.
So I think that it most likely applies to Athens on 7 Saturdays in the fall, and that may be
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that sounds good.
That was
Yeah.
great, Michael.
Well, I gotcha. I think it's good. That one's in tier 3.
We did too. We didn't see it going too far yet.
And the commuter carpooling, that'd be like the clean air in Atlanta that does like carpool matching and has some small subsidies and that sort of thing. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we've talked about for that.
But well,
Thanks.
also what might fit under that is if we had a program where we had electric vehicles that people could rent, like the short-term rentals, where you can go out and just basically put a credit card in a slot and take the car to go do errands and come back. And I think that was also in there in that discussion. So it would be allow people to get out of gasoline-powered engines and into electric vehicles quicker when they couldn't necessarily purchase them themselves.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Next category was pedestrian access, which is tier 1 rated, implementing high priority segments in the walking and bicycling network, and then piggyback onto the Athens in Motion and Greenway network planning efforts by referring to them in the plan. And underneath tier 2, we had increased new mobility options and research UGA bike share program for possible partnership. So on the next slide, this might be the one to surface the comment you made earlier, Mike, about EVs on existing buildings. Here, focusing on electric vehicle expansion, under tier 1, we identified setting an ACC Gov fleet conversion goal for 100% by 2035. Widespread. All right, sorry to miss you for the rest of this, Ilka. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for being patient with all my questions. Thanks, everyone.
If you have more, reach out.
Don't encourage me. Have a good rest of the
No,
day.
we love it. We love it.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Yeah. Also within tier 1, we have widespread EV charging availability, especially targeting multifamily homes in low-income areas or identified areas of need. And also within tier 1, EV education and incentives. Under tier 2, we have EV car share and ACC income-based assistance through a green bank or other for EV purchasing and fleet conversion. And tier 3, we rated voluntary programs to accelerate the transition and EV battery reuse. Okay. Now's the part where I hand things over to Greenlink for the review of chapters 1 through 3 of the plan discussion.
So
I believe that the chapters 1 through 3 were sent over to you all. I've been looking through them and seeing Mike's additions and some suggestions. So we had sent the first draft a while back, took a look at Maggie's comments and a couple of Mike's comments and updated those. And I've sent it forward to you again. And now I'm seeing a couple more comments from Mike, but I guess this is a good opportunity to maybe walk through the chapters and see if there are any key things to flag, or any key ideas to add in there. Megan, Mike, or Matt, feel free to offer any suggestions if you have a better idea of how we should move forward with this. But yeah, I'm here to take notes and make sure all the ideas are heard so we don't miss anything. So I guess we can start with the introduction, which is, I think, on page 3. I did notice that there was include a list of CAB members, so I've got that down. And we'll still need an open letter from the mayor and an executive summary that will be drafted. But yeah, we can start with the introduction. Does anyone have any comments or anything they want to add or missed? I guess, is there anyone here who hasn't read this at all?
Well, if you haven't and you don't want to admit it, it's not too late. I think we're asking for the deadline to be, is it the 10th that we decided? Or the 5th for this? Sam, do you remember? Or Matt or Megan?
I was getting ready to ask Maria and Aaron, so you can just name everyone on the call here.
Well, why don't we say that it's not too late? So if you want to take some time over the next 2 weeks where everybody is going to be kind of scattered around, this would be the time to take a look at it, to add what you want to add, to make suggestions on wording. So if you like the overall general content, then the next thing is, are there any specific things that you think would be improve or reflect a little better in the writing of it? So it's not too late now to put your stamp on the report.
I also wanted to add some clarification while we're looking at this. You'll notice that there's like the black highlighted text up here. These are also not things that will be staying in the draft. They're more like guiding points when you're looking kind of alongside the document with an outline. We just wanted to make sure that we were covering everything in the outline. So if
I kind of like the titles. I mean, they're a great way to kind of highlight that part of the. I mean, I thought they were worth leaving in there myself.
I mean, we can leave
because they help guide the reader to look at the areas they want to really focus on, or help frame out the context of what we said.
Mike, I don't do grammar and spelling, but I just had maybe two little general. Yeah, you know, North Avenue Trade School, they didn't teach us that stuff.
Listen to you.
Just a couple random comments, I guess. On section 6, energy landscape, 1, 2, under figure 6.1, there's a note about neighborhoods with energy burdens also commonly experience higher asthma rates. And when I read it, it seemed a little random that the asthma showed up there but nowhere else. It's just something that jumped out at me.
Yeah, good catch. So maybe have additional health impacts such as, so
Yeah, it just seemed a little, it's just all of a sudden they popped asthma in there for some reason, and I didn't see it, anywhere else, so just wondering why it got tossed in there.
No,
I mean,
that's
I
a good point.
understand, the health issue and all that, but
I think
does that make sense?
it
Yeah.
does, and I could kind of tell you why it walked in there is because it's one of the things that you can measure, like with the wellness program, Athens Wellness Program, and some others. It is one of those things that you can track, and there are 2 or 3 others as well that go along with it. But I do like maybe instead of picking that one item, because there are multiple items that it impacts, just saying such as health and well-being, and then, for example, asthma, and then it kind of makes that point. Good catch.
And the only other thing was on section, I don't know what section this is. Well, further back in there, under previous efforts and frameworks, talking about Athens-Clarke County government, what they've done.
Mhm.
There's several bullet points on, things that the Athens-Clarke County actions they've taken. And my only comment there was, for consistency's sake, in some places they'll point out, well, we saved so many kilowatt hours. In others, they refer to tons of CO emissions. But again, it's kind of random. It seems like the metrics should be more consistent throughout the explanations. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's a little bit of apple, and I know what they're trying to do, but it's kind of an apples and oranges thing. It's sort of like just picking out a number to throw in. But that was it. Just maybe if we can make that a little more consistent.
Yeah, I can see what we can do about that. A lot of these metrics were taken also from the Athens-Clarke County website, where a lot of these programs were. This is a good point to flag, though. We went online and we did some research on things that Athens have done, but this is a great opportunity also to look at this bulleted list and see if there's anything we missed that needs specific calling out or highlighting, or anything that doesn't seem important and maybe wants to be taken out. But yeah, I'll take a look at the consistency of that and see what I can do.
Thank you. Hey, Mike, I'll let you go on to spelling and punctuation.
Yeah. Well, Charlie, the interesting thing is if anybody associated me with good spelling and grammar, they would, and who knows me, they would start laughing. I'm convinced that spell check was created for me alone.
Spell check is dangerous too.
It is. You got to be careful there.
It's a good thing we don't have any attorneys on the call. You can tell. They'd all be picking on the punctuation.
Well, we need the grammar and the punctuation. The editing police. They do a great job. It's not a talent I have, so I greatly appreciate it when those who have it do so.
Yeah, and I'm glad they're not on the call.
So, were there any other things that people saw jumping out on that? Like I said, if you haven't had a chance to read it, we would encourage it. Do the track changes, send it in, everything from grammar and punctuation, but also the kind of things Charlie's picking up or things that we left out. Those are also important. John, you're being really quiet.
I'm here. I don't have much of a voice, so partly why I'm being quiet, but I'm listening.
Just checking in. All right. So if you can have those by the end of the year, maybe that the latest that first week in January, we'd like to get this. So let me tell you what we want to do with it. Is as soon as we kind of finalize it, I'm going to form it up into into an interim report. That's why you see that information up at the top of that first page we started on that said in final report, because I want to release this as an interim report since it does contain really everything we've done, why we did it, what we did, how we went about doing it. And so we will take these chapters, turn them into an interim report along with the addendum that talked about the process. And then we want to send that out to, my goal is to send that out to everyone who participated, every contact that we have, including our mayor and commission, and essentially say, if you think we missed something, let us know. But it does form out how we've approached the plan and will set us up, I hope, because it gets released in January or early February at the latest, that sets us up for when the plan starts coming forth a couple of 3 months later to the public. We kind of have this already out there. It primes the pump. It makes sure that if somebody feels like we didn't reach out to a specific group or get input from a specific group that we need to, we can go back and redo that or do that before it gets to the final stage. And we can kind of circumvent any of that kind of distraction. And the goal being that what we want people to do is focus on the remaining chapters and these key action points, policies as we move forward. And I would prefer people focus on what the meat of the plan, and not how we got there. I want to make sure that already got taken care of, or any questions got taken care of early on. So that's why we want your input. All righty. So what's next?
There we
There's a little
go.
bit of
I'll get,
homework to come. Sorry, Megan, go ahead. I was just going to say there's a little homework coming too.
yeah, and I think Maria's gonna talk us through what's on the horizon.
Yeah, so we'll be sending out updated slides probably Friday, and with all the updates, you can review any final revisions. And along with that, we will be sending out 4 separate polls for each category. And you can go through and vote. Aaron can probably explain more in terms of if you have questions on how it works. But basically, we'd like those. They'll be through, I think, Google. And you can basically, it'll prompt you to fill it all out. And if you fill out all 4 with your thoughts, opinions, and if you agree or disagree, please fill it out before January 10th. And
the reason we're sending out 4 polls was because we felt like it would be less overpowering than trying to do one big one and keep up with it. So we wanted to break it up into very distinct segments that were more manageable. So I don't know about you. I don't want to sit down and have to do a 2-hour poll. So, all right, are there any questions? Do folks have questions on the poll? Or the homework assignment?
All right, then I
Mike,
think the next slide is all you, Mike.
all right. What does the next slide say? Basically, a reminder of what all we have. So we do have these polls coming out. We have a review of the final materials that Southface will send out on the tier system. They will finalize those and send those out to us for you to look at. You'll have the polls to go over. Then we have the chapters 1, 2, 3, and the addendum. So we have a little bit to do between now and that first week, into the first week in January for everybody. That said, so is this, are we at the end, Megan? I can't remember if there's another slide after this. And this, aren't we there?
There is another slide that maybe isn't showing up. It just
I
says
don't see it.
contact important on it.
Okay, there we go. So with that said, this is the last official CAB meeting of 2021, and we are getting ready to start a new year. And I want to thank everybody for the effort, the heart, the generosity of time that has gone into making this. We are closing in on the last of this program and this process, although it will take us a few more months. We will be looking at a more focused effort in the end of January, February timeframe to start looking at the equity piece specifically to make sure we've got that covered in this, and then we can expect some draft material on the plan for mid-February, March, early March timeframe, so we could start really digging into that and making sure it's ready for release to the commission for review and then on to the public. So we are on the backside of the process. I want to thank everybody for getting us this far and for spending your time with us this year. And I hope everybody has a safe and joyous holiday season. And thank you for joining us.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, Maggie.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, I just realized I was such an idiot. The one thing I forgot to say, you won't be back. I'm such an idiot.
No, that's okay. I mean, we'll just like say it was a sneak attack.
Well, let me ask a question. You're gonna move up to Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to still stay involved a little bit with this?
Let me think on that. Because my personal curiosity really wants to see how this is implemented. I mean, we've been working on this for the past year or so. In what way do you imagine?
Well, at least for the next meeting, if you came back, I'd have a chance to say, and Maggie's joining us, even though she's left. And I'd be able to at least make that part of it up since I can't believe I forgot it because I actually wrote it down to make sure I thank you publicly for all your work. But if you wanted to sit in on the meeting and certainly contact me back. I mean, you have the password to the OS intern account until we change it, and which may never happen the way that works. But if you still have an interest, I can understand if it's like, well, I need to move on, because sometimes having things kind of hang from the past isn't what the best path forward.
Well, there's also, I mean, I just realized that this is still live. So let's see if we can turn that off for a second.
Oh, yep.
Well, now I got to kind of say